Welcome, everybody. This is Julie Axter, the executive editor and one of the co-founders of Innovation Excellence, and we are delighted to have you here with us today for a really exciting hour with my dear friend and co-founder, Rowan Gibson, who's going to talk about the best ways to unlock your ability to innovate and his incredible new book, The Four Lenses. So before I introduce you, Rowan, and let you loose on this audience, let me just do a couple of housekeeping things. We want to make this next hour interactive. So at any point, please type your question in and we will answer it. We will respond. So Rowan is very excited about and open to any question that you have at any time. We are recording this seminar, or this webinar rather, and so it'll be available for sharing, and we're just really excited that you're here. So a quick story about Rowan. I met Rowan about 3 years ago. We were both speaking at a conference that I think Imaginatic was putting on. I went first, Rowan went second. He came up to me in the break and he said something very nice, and he said, let's have a drink later. We had a drink, and he said, you know, I'm going to start this thing called Innovation Excellence, and I need some help in it. I'd like to get you involved. And really it was that almost instantaneous, Rowan, that we got together, and the rest is history. We've had so much fun with Braden Kelly and Dean Tobias and Mari Annixter and a lot of the other people who have joined in, Zulma Acevedo. But really it's because of you that I have had this marvelous opportunity, so I want to publicly say thank you. And I also want to say how excited I am for your new book. Rowan's a very interesting innovation practitioner. He spends most of his time around the world working with companies and governments. He's been in 61 countries. His 3 books have been published in 21 languages. He advises, he consults, he does master classes, and most of all, he really helps people think and do innovation differently. So Rowan, with that, I want to say welcome. I want to hand it over to you, and we'll be having a conversation throughout the next hour.
Wow. Well, thanks, Julie. What a wonderful introduction. Just want to say hello to everybody that's out there and attending the webinar in various countries around the world. So not sure what time it is wherever you are, but thanks for attending. Try to make the next hour as exciting as we can. So again, thanks, Julie, for the wonderful introduction. I want to get straight on with the content here. You know, so we call this the 4 best ways to unlock your ability to innovate. And we want to make this, if we can, a conversation. You know, I'm a keynote speaker, so you know, anybody says to me, start speaking, I start holding a speech, as Julie knows really well. So actually, I'm hoping, Julie, you're going to interrupt me at some point, because if you don't, I'll just keep talking and talking and talking as keynote speakers do.
Oh, so, you know I will, Rowan. You know I will.
Exactly. So let's make this a chat, you know, a banter if we can. And hopefully we can also open up to those of you out there that are attending, so that, you know, if you have questions, please just send them in. We'll be able to pick them up. And I don't know if we can maybe later on open up so that we can talk to some of you that are out there. If you have questions, we can talk live. So anyway, let's see if we can do that. But before we do, I kind of wanted to just give a background to what this book is about. So here's the book, 4 Lenses of Innovation. It was launched, published on March the 2nd. So it's been out now for less than a month. Been doing really well. Very, very happy with results. The book's already it's the #1 new release in organizational change on Amazon.com. It's been #1 in books in organizational change. It goes up and down every day according to how many people buy the book, but it's been a very, very good launch. We've had a lot of wonderful PR, interviews in Inc. magazine and Forbes, and we've got some wonderful radio stuff coming up and television, hopefully, as well in New York. So that's good stuff. I want to give you actually a very quick impression of what the book looks like. So I'm going to come out of PowerPoint for a moment. I'm going to come into another program that gives you a view of what the book actually looks like. Julie, are you seeing that?
I am.
So,
great.
So this is going to be, I'm going to flip through pages very quickly, so you're going to hear like the pages turn. But I just want to give people the impression, just in terms of kind of what the book looks like color-wise. You know, it's just an incredible experience, I think, to read. It's not just a book, you know. I wanted it to be more of a kind of celebration of creativity and innovation. So I think there's so many books out there now and mine included, by the way, I'm guilty of this. I think Innovation to the Core, my last book, it was a typical Harvard Business Press book, you know, so very academic and so on. But you know, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the wonder and the joy and the fun and the excitement of creativity and of innovation. So I just want to give you a quick impression, you know, what the book sort of looks like. So I'm flipping through various pages here, so you can see, you know, the book has an experience and not just as something that you sit and read. So that's kind of, I think, a good way to introduce it. And I'm going to come back to the PowerPoint now. And I wanted to sort of just give a quick introduction to, you know, why the book, what was the point really of looking at the four lenses of innovation as a thinking tool. You know, I call it a power tool for creative thinking. What was really the point of all that? Well, let me go to the sort of the introduction of the book. And basically what I'm saying there is that a lot of the work in recent years on innovation has focused on the social environment. You know, basically saying that innovation tends to come out of very fertile environments, you know, like cities, New York, London, Sydney, you know, cities where we crash a lot of different people together from different diverse backgrounds and whatever, or it's university campuses. It could be online networks. By that I don't just mean social networks, but sort of scientific networks or open innovation networks. And then, of course, industry hubs or technology hubs like Silicon Valley. So a lot of the work on innovation has been basically saying, look, if you get together a lot of really interesting people and you give them the chance, either in a particular geography or globally, to connect and collaborate, then, you know, the sparks will fly and we'll get a lot of great innovation coming out of those environments. And that's true. Nothing wrong with that at all. But I do believe that it's only half the equation. So when you actually think about what we're doing today, you know, a lot of companies are building wonderful environments for innovation, where a lot of people can get together and collaborate and so on. And that's just inside the company. Of course, externally, we have all of the open innovation networks and so on. But as you can see here on the screen, what I'm saying in the book is that building a social environment that's conducive to creativity and risk-taking is only part of the challenge. The reason I say that is that ideas do not come out of cities. They don't come out of campuses. They don't come out of, you know, networks or industry hubs. Ideas come out of the heads of people who are connected to those social environments. So in other words, for us to really understand you know, how innovation works and particularly where big ideas come from, we have to do more than just understand, you know, the kind of pro-innovation environments that act as a catalyst. We also have to understand what happens inside the human mind. You know, what happens inside the brain? What are the thinking patterns that actually lead people to their great discoveries? So it's really about bringing those two things together, you know, the environment on the one hand, but also these thinking patterns inside the head that lead people to great discoveries. So as I say in the book, it's really about the second half of the innovation equation, with the first half being social environment. So the second half is about understanding particular patterns of thinking that unlock our ability to innovate. In essence, what we're talking about here is learning how to emulate the mind of the innovator. So really the book is about, you know, how do innovators actually think? If you look at all these cases of great innovation, you know, what were these people thinking? What was it that led them to those great insights, to those great discoveries? Because if we can figure out what those thinking patterns are, then maybe we can emulate them. Maybe we can actually use them deliberately. So just to give you a quick synopsis overview of the book, it's divided into four parts. The first is the mind of the innovator, which is what I just talked about. So I'll get onto that in a moment. The second part is the power of patterns. The third part is looking through the four lenses. So there's a lot of examples of how we actually look through those lenses. And number four is how big ideas are actually built, which is quite an interesting story around, you know, what is it that goes on in that sort of flash of illumination that we've all probably experienced. So very quickly,
and Rowan,
go ahead.
If I may, we're gonna definitely pause after each one of these kind of meaty topics and ask for questions and have a little bit of a dialogue, right?
Absolutely, Julie. We can pause right now if you want to, if you've got anything to say about what I just mentioned.
Well, I will say one thing, which is the thing, because I've used this tool, I used it at P&G, I've used it at a couple of other clients and in public, and it's so profoundly simple and elegant. And it's kind of what has been most exciting to me is how much it frees people up to think in new ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is. That's why I call it a power tool. I mean, it is a really, really amazing tool. I remember my dad. My dad used to say to me when we ever got the chance to work together in the garden or in the garden shed or the garage, he would say, "Let the tool do the work." And there's a specific tool for a specific job. And I've experienced with this thing around the world, all those 61 countries, all the big organizations, and maybe some smaller organizations that I've worked with. Every single time, this tool works incredibly well. So I'm going to go and talk about how it sort of works. The first part of the book, as I said, is called The Mind of the Innovator. And really here, the real point is that we want to figure out where big ideas come from. I know this is only the very front end of innovation, and so much of my work is really around what happens after you had the idea. How do you evaluate ideas? How do you align them with strategy? How do you rapidly reallocate resources behind them? How do you manage ideas? Through the sort of experimentation, prototyping, through the pipeline, all of that. But essentially, there's no point in doing the rest of the innovation process if the idea sucks. There's only really any point in implementing, executing, commercializing, scaling up an idea that really is going to create some form of value. So where do those ideas come from? And what I've been really focused on, actually, for quite some time, many years really, is understanding the mind of the innovator. If you think about some of these great icons of innovation, Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, down on the left there is Elon Musk, who's kind of currently my favorite innovation hero. Howard Schultz of Starbucks, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. I often can't tell the two of them apart. They look so similar these days. But how do these people think? When you read these articles about kind of after the fact stories of innovation, what strikes me is that we read about what was so successful and how great that innovation was, but very rarely does anyone ever try to go back and say, what were they thinking? What were the thinking patterns? What were the perspectives that led these people to their discoveries? And by the way, in case any of our female listeners out there object to the fact that I've only got men up there, I also prepared this slide because, in fact, I just came back from Malaysia and was at a huge event, like 250, 300 women entrepreneurs. And so, it's I think it's really good that and I got killed for this in my first book, Rethinking the Future, because there were no women innovators mentioned. But anyway, it could be people like Oprah Winfrey, Debbie Fields, Anita Roddick, Marie Curie, Mary Kay Ash, Martha Stewart. I mean, these are all incredible innovators. So what goes on inside the mind of the innovator? And in fact, with this book, I actually went back in time as well and thought about innovators like Einstein, like Thomas Edison, like Henry Ford, or even way back in time to the Renaissance with Galileo and Gutenberg and Da Vinci. And the whole point here is, how do these people reach their discoveries? And what I've discovered is, the point is, if you can understand their thinking patterns, maybe there's an opportunity for us to actually reverse engineer those thinking patterns. In order to create a system, a tool, a methodology, something that we can use deliberately and systematically to discover great insights and ideas. So what I discovered was that those innovators came to their discoveries not by sitting there staring out of the window waiting for a light bulb to go off above their heads, but actually by looking at the world from a fresh perspective. And so there were actually 4 perspectives that are common to all of those great innovation stories. The first is called challenging orthodoxies. So this is really about taking a contrarian view. If everyone is zigging, what if we zag? What if we challenge common assumptions, conventional wisdom, the ways we do things normally inside companies and inside industries? What if we tried to do the reverse of that? The second lens is called harnessing trends, which is about really getting a wide-angle lens and figuring out, what are the major changes that are going on around the world, and how do we harness the power of that change? How do we bring it into the business model to create new value. The third lens is called leveraging resources in new ways. So basically saying every company has a set of skills, core competencies, and strategic assets. And how do we use those resources to stretch into new growth opportunities? Or how do we connect what we have with other people's skills and assets in order to create new value? The fourth lens is called understanding needs. So this is like the holy grail of innovation at the moment, you know, the customer insight. Kind of getting under the customer's skin, looking back at your business, your product, your service from the customer's perspective, figuring out, you know, where are the pain points, and how do we address those pain points before the competition? You know, how do we design solutions from the customer backwards? So those, in essence, are the four lenses of innovation. As you said, Julie, it's an incredibly powerful tool because instead of sort of saying, okay, sit down and brainstorm, what we're saying is sit down and systematically challenge your assumptions. Harness.
That's right.
You know, harness real. So these are real industry orthodoxies or company orthodoxies. These are real trends that are going on in the world that, you know, we should be harnessing, bringing into the business model. These are real resources that we either have or we could acquire or we could, you know, partner with others to sort of bring into what we do. In order to sort of create new growth opportunities. And these are real customer needs that we're addressing here. So it's very, I think, you know, the ideas, the insights that come out of the four lenses are very grounded in reality. And the reason I call them lenses is that they allow us to see opportunities that we otherwise would have been blind to. You know,
And Rowan, I've got a question, because what I've observed in the way you use these is it's not only with executive teams, but you use these with huge groups of people, with people who are all throughout the organization. So does it work well at different levels inside of companies?
You know, what amazes me, it works well at every single level. You know, I've worked with, you know, every kind of company. I can remember, for example, a diamond mining company in Botswana. And so we introduced the four lenses right across the entire company. And we had miners, you know, down inside a diamond mine saying, okay, look, we got to challenge orthodoxies here about what we're doing, you know, or people were sort of saying, how do we use what we have in new ways? And they were able to, you know, in many ways revolutionize many of the things that they were doing inside their business by getting everyone everywhere to use the same tool, the same methodology. And by the way, what I think is interesting, a lot of companies already use ideation methodologies. You know, so they might be using, you know, the 6 thinking caps or SIT or TRIZ or design thinking, and they're all fine and wonderful. But what I found is, instead of sort of saying to everyone, okay, here's a bunch of tools, use you know, whichever you feel most comfortable with, what I do is I fit them into the lenses. So there's a framework here. In other words, if you're going to use SIT, for example, I usually fit that into challenging orthodoxies, taking something apart, examining, you know, the thing, looking at its individual attributes, and then saying, how do we challenge assumptions around these things? Or if you're doing design thinking, I fit that into the fourth lens, which is, you know, understanding unmet needs and thinking from the customer backwards. So it's an amazing framework, really, for organizing and sort of systematizing the way a company innovates at the front end. Any more thoughts, questions on that, Julie?
No, I think keep rolling.
Any questions coming in that we want to address or think about?
No, not at the moment. Not at the moment, but I know we'll get some. I think people are, my sense is in absorbing mode. Okay, good. Okay, so let me go on. One of the things I think is really kind of neat and different about this book is it doesn't just go into talking about the sort of contemporary cases of innovation, which sort of everybody does, but it actually goes back in time and says, you know, how come we had this incredible explosion of creativity and new thinking and invention and innovation between the 15th and the 17th or 14th and 17th centuries in Europe? What happened? Because we had 1,000 years of stagnation, you know, with the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, as they were aptly called. What changed? So I sort of went back in time and I looked at that and thought, well, clearly on the one hand, as I said earlier, it was about the cultural environment, the social environment. It was, you know, those city-states in northern Italy
if we think about Milan or Venice and so on, where rich banking families like the Medicis, were bringing together artists and scientists and philosophers and stuff, and they were kind of crashing those different domains together. So that was really important. But it wasn't just about, the social environment. So remember the book, The Medici Effect? Very, very important.
Yeah.
But I think it wasn't just about this social environment. It was also very much about the difference in the ways people were thinking. So in other words, the Renaissance introduced new thinking patterns. Humanism was a brand new philosophy, and basically said, well, it's not about looking outside the human being, looking for supernatural causes for everything, but it's about looking on the inside and saying we are the genius. Genius is us, and we can bring out that genius by doing all sorts of incredible new things. So it introduced completely new thinking patterns. And I went back and actually examined a lot of the great cases of invention and creativity from the Renaissance period, and found that it was exactly correlated to these four lenses of innovation: challenging orthodoxies, harnessing trends, leveraging resources, understanding needs. So very briefly, if you go back and you think about those Renaissance innovators, people like Copernicus, Galileo, and so on, they were contrarians, they were rebels. They were saying, the Earth is not the center of the universe. We have to rethink the whole way we look at astronomy and whatever. So they were willing to challenge conventional wisdom, stuff that had been set down and not challenged for maybe 1,000 years.
Hey, Rowan. I've got a question for you from Francisco Pecorella, and it's, could you repeat how we can combine design thinking with the four lenses?
Yeah, well, design thinking, if you think about the essence of design thinking, it really is about designing solutions from the customer backward. So, so instead of sitting down and sort of saying, okay, let's design a neat, beautiful, sexy product, it's first of all, let's look at the way things are used. Let's look at the customer's needs, the customer's current frustrations with current product offerings and service offerings and so on, or frustrations with a current business model. You can design, whole business models from the customer backward. And what I'm saying is that whole methodology, that whole way of thinking fits very neatly into the fourth lens, which is called understanding needs. Other things fit very well there too, like ethnographic research, sort of thing that P&G does, like going out and actually living in people's homes and filming them as they're doing, household chores, or, I don't know, cleaning their teeth or applying beauty products or whatever. But, a lot of the work we now do around customer insights sort of fits into that fourth lens of innovation, which is all about understanding customer needs. I hope that sort of answers the question.
I think it does. And while we're in questions, we've got another one, which is the Kindle rich media version that you just showed? The Kindle version have the imagery and the media that you just showed? No,
it does. Okay, I've got to be careful what I say, but no, if I give you one word of advice, please, please, please buy the print version. I mean, I'll almost offer you a money-back guarantee. This is going to blow you away, really. But
okay, all right. Somebody
asked,
and so I wanted to answer.
Yeah, but Kindle has a lot of limitations, and particularly, for example, if you're looking at an ebook on a Paperwhite, a Kindle Paperwhite, which is black and white, by definition, you're never going to get any of those colors, and you're never going to see the beauty, the graphic beauty that you get. The print version is like 1,000 times better.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, so let me just continue with the story. We're still in the Renaissance, and I'm saying, it really was about challenging orthodoxies. Columbus, said, what if I sail west instead of east, and circumnavigate the globe? These are real orthodoxy challenges. Trends, there were incredible trends going on. It was really a time of the new, new ways of doing commerce, new interest in books and classical antiquity, new kind of clothing, new kinds of foods. I mean, there were new countries on the map. Everything was new. And so really a lot of it was about how do we harness those trends in order to create new opportunities. There's this whole trend map of the Renaissance period that took me about 3 weeks to put together, which is, part of the story there. And then leveraging resources. If you think about someone like Gutenberg and you think about the printing press, it's an incredibly good example of leveraging existing things into a new idea. So the printing press itself was inspired by the wine press. You know, Gutenberg lived in the Rhineland area of Germany and was surrounded by wine presses, and it was the obvious thing to do to create a press that had the same kind of screw press mechanism as the wine presses. Stuff like, you think about how did he manage to create those metal types? Well, he was a goldsmith. He understood metalworking. That was his trade, his father's trade, his grandfather's trade. So he was leveraging that skill into a completely new opportunity. Paper. One of his business partners actually owned a paper mill. So, he had ready access to paper. And then the printer's ink was actually inspired by oil paint that came out of Holland like about 10 years earlier. So it was really about piecing together those things to create, a wonderful new innovation. So that was leveraging resources. And of course, if you think about Da Vinci, there's a guy who really understood needs that we weren't aware of. Nobody back then knew we needed parachutes and helicopters and all that sort of stuff. And he was a great observer, and he was he took thousands and thousands and thousands of notes and sketches and whatever, looking at issues that other people just ignored. So if you bring that up to date, you'd say, well, if we take that same approach to innovation, as for example Da Vinci did, you'll be able to discover a lot of unmet needs that we can address. So to sum up that story, really, it wasn't just about bringing together all those wonderful people and those brilliant scientists and artists or whatever. It really was about changing people's thinking. And the four lenses really were the drivers for all of that incredible creativity and invention that came out of that period. So for us today, what I'm really trying to say is we can create wonderful environments for innovation. Google, of course, has these beautiful offices. Zappos, a whole bunch of companies do this, and I love that. It's really necessary. But what I'm saying is it's not enough. It's not enough just to give people, a great ecosystem, open innovation, beautiful offices, and whatever. We also need to think about the way we think, the way we actually approach innovation, and use a powerful tool to open up those new opportunities that we otherwise would never have seen.
Very cool.
So I can go on, Julie. If you want me to stop there, I can go on or answer some more questions.
No, I think keep going, Rowan. Oh wait, I've got two new questions that just popped up. Would it be possible to get a copy of this presentation after the call? Is one question, and there's a little bit more to that, which I have to get on. The
webinar's recorded anyway, so it'll be possible to go back through the presentation that way.
Okay, perfect.
I think that's the best way of doing it.
The second question is there a particular hierarchy? This is from Mock. Is there a particular hierarchy in which you use the four lenses? Do you use them in a particular order? That's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really use them in a particular order. I think the bigger story here is use all four. The thing is, inside most companies, you find that there's a lot of work usually done already around customer insights, which is the fourth lens, and also trends, which is the second lens. But there are you find fewer companies that systematically challenge orthodoxies, the first lens of innovation, challenging industry orthodoxies, company orthodoxies, and so on. They don't really usually do that systematically. And also, few companies really think about, what are our embedded core competencies and strategic assets? How could we recombine them, repurpose them, use them differently? Or, what's available to us in the outside world in terms of other people's competencies and assets? How could we combine them with our own? So I think that most of the work is done on like one half of that, on one side of the diagram we're looking at here, the green one and the red one. But companies tend to ignore the other two. So I don't think it's really a question of doing things in a particular order, but it is very much a question of doing all four.
Yeah, and that I would foot stomp that, Rowan, because I think the power comes in combining or crashing, as you say. And speaking of crashing, there's a really interesting question from Francisco. The question is this: can you really change the way people think? That's sort of an age-old, perennial question for innovators. What do you think, Rowan?
You can change the way people think because here's the thing, you can't turn people into, let's say, natural, reflexive innovators who were born that way. I mean, there's just a case that we look at these great innovators and they are either through nature or through nurture, they've been able to develop their creative skills and their innovation skills or entrepreneurial skills to a very high level. And not everybody's done that. But that doesn't mean that we can't get there. What we can do is we can look at the way they think. And I think the great news here is that we can systematically, we can deliberately use those thinking patterns that may not come naturally to us. And that's the big story, I think, with the four lenses, is we're able to do things that are not reflexive, that are not natural. So what I usually do, I have a group of people, and those people in a team may not be the marketing people or the R&D people or the innovation people. They may be from HR, from IT, from finance. They might be customers from the outside or whoever else, like brought together as an innovation team. And you find that people there are using the four lenses as a power tool and coming up with ideas that amaze them, because they never thought of themselves as being highly creative. So that's the beauty, the power of the tool. It enhances our natural capability to be creative, because all of us have that innate capability for creativity.
Well, there are a lot of people who don't think that inside of companies.
Yeah, I know, but that's one of the things we have to change. I mean, there's an attitude that only certain people have come down to this planet with creative skills, and the rest of them are suits and just walk around doing things different. No, I think that this is part of the whole mission here, the whole movement, really. And I think innovation excellence has really helped in that regard, is to understand that innovation truly can be an all-the-time, everywhere capability that can involve everyone in the company every day. And I've been working hard at that for like 15 years, building these deep, sustainable capabilities inside companies. And the four lenses is really the hero there, because the four lenses makes it possible for anyone at any level to systematically come in and deliberately, challenge orthodoxies, harness trends, and so on, in order to discover these new opportunities.
Okay, so we've got some fantastic questions coming in, and I'm going to read 3 of them, and then Paul Hopcraft, I'll get to yours after that. But they're all kind of about the same issue, which I recognize, I call it the issue of how. So from Christian Gattaz, what methods and tools do you use when you work with each lens? So that's one question. The second one is, how do you get organizations started on an innovation path? That's from Jeff. And then I might have misunderstood Francisco's question about changing thinking. He says, I understand we can change it, but where's the good starting point? So I think all 3 of these questions are about how. How do you start this? Go back to the very beginning when you started with Coke or Mars or one of the companies you worked with. How do you actually get people to embrace this opportunity? And then once you do that, Rowan, how do you get people, what are the tools? This is Christian's question. What are the tools and methods you use?
Yeah. Okay, well, I think the first step really is to demystify what innovation's about. There's just so many myths, so many people today. I mean, it's just so pervasive that we think of innovation as being, chaos and serendipity and bolts of lightning. I remember that actually Tom Peters once said that the innovation process the phrase innovation process is an oxymoron believed by morons with ox-like brains. So there's still this, but that's very Tom, right? As you know better than anybody. But we've got to demystify. So I think one of the first things I want to do is to unpack, how you get to great ideas. And people look at it and they go, wow, I mean, that's doable. That's something that I can actually do, because the actual thinking processes involved are not, how can I put this? They're not unnatural to human beings. I mean, we do question things. We do analyze things. We do look at things. I mean, they're not asking us to use our brains completely differently. But really what it's about is channeling those natural thought processes and that kind of natural creativity in specific ways by looking at the world, or looking at a product, or looking at a situation through these lenses, because these are the lenses, these are the perspectives that great innovators use. So, I start out by explaining that. and just trying to make it simple for people. It's like, you know, one of these celebrity chefs on TV, like Jamie Oliver, you know, coming on and saying, look, cooking is actually pretty simple. All you have to do is this, and you go, wow, I want to go in the kitchen and start cooking. I want to get that effect when I talk to audiences, and you know, thankfully that usually happens. So what I do is I'll explain the simplicity of this thing, then go into the lenses in more detail, give them a whole bunch of really exciting cases, so people can they can relate with that, they can see how tangible it is, and then they get a chance to go off and start using the lenses. So coming back to that question about what are the tools, I have a whole bunch of exercises that I use around the four lenses. So I was going to get to this a little bit later. I actually have some in the PowerPoint, but splitting up a bigger group or even part of a company into smaller teams, you know, around each of those lenses. So your orthodoxies team, your trends team, your resources team, and your customer needs team, and then giving them time and space, giving them tools, giving them exercises to actually, you know, stretch their thinking along new lines and use those lenses to discover new insights and opportunities. I think I've covered maybe two of the three, or even all three questions there.
Okay, so then we've got one more question. This is from our good friend and contributor to Innovation Excellence in Europe, Paul Hopcraft. He says, how did Rowan discover these four lenses?
Yeah, it came out of a lot of research into hundreds of cases of successful innovation. And this research was done actually some years ago. The four lenses is not a brand new tool. It's actually been used by a lot of companies since the mid-90s. So this is not like management theory. This is management science. This is a proven methodology that's been used by some of the largest organizations in the world incredibly successfully to generate, you know, ideas and opportunities worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. But basically, to answer Paul's question, it came out of some in-depth research into hundreds of cases of innovation to try to figure out, you know, what were the common drivers, what were the perspectives that led innovators to their discoveries. And these four lenses, these four perspectives came out as the common drivers. And that's really been the basis for the whole methodology.
Very good. Cool. Carry on.
So carry on. So let me just go to the second part of the book, and I think this also addresses this idea of how do we change the way we think. The second part of the book is really about kind of neuroscience and the way the human mind works. It's called The Power of Patterns. One of the things we know is that our brains are pattern recognizers. You know, that's how we recognize faces, how we recognize voices, how we recognize songs, and how we recognize, you know, stories and whatever. Everything that we have around us is a pattern, even physical patterns. You know, I recognize a chair as a chair because it has a physical pattern to it. And so what happens is that, as I have here on the slide, we use patterns to save energy. Because if we had to wake up in the morning and face the world and we didn't have any of these patterns stored in our brains, everything would be completely new to us. It would be bewildering. And so the fact is we have these patterns stored, we automatically recognize them, and therefore we don't have to think about them anymore. I don't have to think when I'm looking around me, oh, that's a glass, that's a chair, this is a table, and this thing must be a pen, you know, because it's already stored in my head. And that's the way the brain works, which is really good in one way. I mean, as I say on the slide, remember your first driving lesson. I can remember that lesson was bewildering for me because everything was new, and I had to learn how to use the feet, the hands, the eyes, the steering wheel, you know, all those other aspects of learning to drive, as well as the highway code and all that sort of thing. But now when we drive, we don't think about any of that stuff. We drive almost subconsciously because we've learned the pattern and we've memorized the pattern, and we use it without even thinking about it. So that's the good news. The bad news is that what that creates is a kind of functional fixedness, where we look at objects that we use every day and we never think about them any differently. So I've got a toothbrush here on the screen. We use that thing every single day, and yet none of us really think about how could it be different? How could I redesign that? How could it be better? And if you look at what some people have done out there, there are like amazing things like, I don't know, self-balancing toothbrushes. I actually have one of these things. It's a solar panel powered ionic toothbrush, it's got a little solar panel in it. And it takes in the sunlight or the light that's in the bathroom, and it turns out, don't ask me what it does with it, but something about ions and positive and negative. And what it basically does is when you put it in your mouth and you brush your teeth, it attracts plaque like a magnet. So this is a completely different, this is a Japanese invention. There's a $4,000 luxury titanium toothbrush. There are electronic toothbrushes with silicone bristles. You may have seen this thing as a brand new toothbrush from Braun that has a smart app, that tells you how good you are at brushing your teeth while you're doing it. There's even like singing toothbrushes, songs by Lady Gaga. So these are like, the possibilities are endless, but how many of us actually think about those things when we pick up a familiar object?
So, well, I'm going to break in here, Rowan, because this really addresses another question from, I'm not sure if it's from Paul or somebody else in Switzerland, which is that, the kinds of, the toothbrush as an example, somebody had to take a risk to get that done. And there are many risks, including the ultimate risk of, failing, I suppose. So Herbert in Switzerland asks, how do you convince a rather risk-averse company to take more risks?
Well, I mean, I guess there's a very common adage these days, which is, what's the greatest risk? Doing things differently or doing things the same old way? That's a very sort of simple answer. But one of the things that I do with companies is, first of all, we want to produce radical ideas because incremental improvements just don't have the kind of value built into them that will generate, huge chunks of new revenue. They're just not exciting or disruptive or radical enough to do that. So if the goal is to come up with a product that will, that will generate huge amounts of new revenues or change the game or, disrupt an industry or whatever, we're not going to do that with incremental stuff. It's not good enough. So we want to pursue radical ideas in the first place because they have that potential. But then, of course, the more radical an idea is, the greater the inherent risk because we're doing something that maybe no one's ever done before. So the idea there, and I addressed this in the last book, really in Innovation to the Core, was how do we try to take the risk out of those endeavors by listing, for example, I would say the core things about that idea, the sort of the things upon which that idea is based, and then we try to create a series of low-cost experiments to either validate or invalidate those critical assumptions on which that idea is based. So you don't want to just leap off a cliff without a bungee rope. You want to be like P&G, for example, will test a lot of stuff, go out and talk to customers, try different configurations, figure out different price levels. Try to take the risk out of that thing before you launch it. So on the one hand, yes, we want to pursue radical ideas. We've got to get that message through to our companies because doing the same old thing just slightly better is not going to cut it. But on the other hand, how do we systematically try to take the risk out of some of these kind of moonshots?
All right, we'll carry on. We have a few more questions, but I think it's worth letting you get a little bit further into the material.
Okay, so I'll just go as quick as I can. The thing with these patents is that, we just talked about things like the toothbrush, functional fixedness and whatever, but the bigger story here is that we create organizational patents. So we create ways of doing things inside our companies, inside our industries that become fixed, and they become invisible to us. We don't even think about them anymore. We come to work every Monday morning. We don't think about those patterns that we're following that have maybe been handed down through generations of managers or just a kind of like folklore in the industry, if that's the only way you do things. So we've got to learn to challenge those things, and the only way we're going to do that is by deliberately, systematically unpacking what we currently do and looking at our assumptions and listing them, and then trying to say, what if we did the reverse? So that's so really, and I think Edward de Bono said, that the essence really of innovation and creativity is breaking those existing patterns and creating new ones. And that's what the four lenses are there to do. That's why I call it a power tool. I mean, if you're going to try to put a hole in a concrete wall, you can't do it with a pencil, or a finger. You're going to need a power drill, right? And so if we're going to break through these very powerful patterns that kind of dictate the way we do things, even though we're not even aware of it anymore, we're going to need a powerful tool to do that, and that's what the four lenses kind of offers us.
Excellent.
So just very quickly going on, the third part really is where I don't want to spend the whole time going back and talking about history and whatever. I really do want to give readers some meat to chew on in terms of contemporary examples. I know that Paul Hopcroft, we just had one of his questions. Paul was saying, I need those contemporary examples. Well, they're here. There are just so many examples in the book around, for example, challenging orthodoxies, which is, they've just got a couple, some brands, some names up on the screen that are discussed. Some of them are classic cases. Some of them are really modern stuff, right up into, Beats by Dre, Tesla, which is fantastic example of challenging all kinds of orthodoxies. I mean, Elon Musk was told by the, quote unquote experts in Detroit, you'll never be able to make this car. You'll never be able to bring it to market. No one's ever going to want it, even if you did bring it to market. You'll never be able to make a profit. You'll never be able to sell it because you don't have dealers. You'll never be able to build charging stations across the U.S. or otherwise. So Tesla's a great example of challenging all kinds of orthodoxies, and there are many more. So one of the key questions there is, what if you challenge your assumptions? That's what we want teams to ask themselves. Trends. I talk about seeing the future in the present. I mean, most of the stuff that's going to define the future is trends that are already out there. We just have to kind of spot them, like that eagle. So there are great examples in the book of companies over time that have really been able to do that successfully. Is spot the trends, harness those trends, and bring them into the business model. So I talk about that as kind of riding these waves of change. Question, are we riding those waves, or are we laying on the beach waiting for the tsunami to come up and hit us? Because inside a lot of industries, these changes do represent tsunamis. So one of the questions in the book is, we should ask ourselves, what will be the tsunami in our industry? How do we make sure we're riding that wave instead of being washed away by it? So I like to ask, which wave are you riding? There's a whole bunch of things going on out in the world, whether they're technological trends or demographic trends or lifestyle trends or whatever kind of trends. Which of those waves are we riding as a company? Third lens here, again, loads of examples of companies that have been able to repurpose, redeploy, recombine their competencies and assets in new ways. Lego's an example of a company that's using someone else's resources, like licensing Star Wars or licensing Batman or Superman or those other sort of superhero franchises. That's a very good example of actually using someone else's resources and adding them to your business model. Some of the others there, like Disney, like ESPN, like Virgin, been able to take their core competencies and strategic assets and stretch them into all kinds of new growth opportunities. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides. Understanding needs. It's really about, none of us were asking for any of this stuff that we see here. None of us were asking for Google Earth, Facebook, Amazon, Skype, Twitter, Uber, Starbucks. But clearly the need existed. It was out there because now we can't live without those things. So how do we discover those needs and address them before the competition? We've all been using these crappy little earbuds, since we had the iPod. No one kind of thought about coming up with a $300 designer headphone until Beats by Dre came along. We're all frustrated that we've got to pay, $500 a night to sleep in New York, but no one came up with something as revolutionary and disruptive as Airbnb. We're all frustrated with taxi services. Some of them can't even speak English when we turn up somewhere. New York's a good example, by the way. But how many of us would have come up with something like Uber? So it's really about discovering those pain points and then somehow figuring out how do we turn those pain points into bliss points, into points of joy and happiness. And that's really the essence of the fourth lens. So those are the four lenses, and there are just tons and tons of great examples and cases in the book that illustrate how to use them.
Okay, that's hysterical, because just the last question we just got, in a moment, Rowan, I'd actually like to open it up and see if anybody would like to talk to you live, and I'm giving the audience a heads up that if they want to, they should raise their hand. There's a little hand tab. Everybody, it should be on your control tab. But Mock asked, are these examples in the book? Are these case studies in the book? And he also asks, can you tell us a little bit about the Corning example? And Christiane, I'm going to come back to your question in a moment, but why don't we answer Mock's question about Corning? And in the meantime, if anybody wants to speak live to Rowan, just raise your hand and I'll open up the line.
Okay, so to quickly answer the question, yes, all those cases and many, 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 many more are in the book. I mean, it is absolutely packed full with examples, cases, stories, anecdotes, quotes, whatever, that really illustrate how those lenses have worked really successfully for innovators in just the last sort of 5, 10, 15 years. And I think one of the key points we have to understand is that most of the innovators involved use those things subconsciously. Not all. Some of them use them systematically. But, you know, that's not the point. The point is they work. And so for us, the opportunity is to use the lenses systematically. Coming back to Corning, Corning's a great case of leveraging resources in new ways. Corning started out, you know, it's a very, very old company, well over 100 years, making specialty glass. I mean, they made, they were the, you know, the Coke bottle, and they made headlights for the early cars of Ford, stuff in the, you know, the railroad industry and whatever else. But they've been able to really stretch their core competencies and their strategic assets into adjacent opportunities, and even opportunities that are way beyond adjacent. So they're very, very big in fiber optics. You know, that's one of the areas that they got into a few decades ago. They've been able to, of course, I mean, every single one of us that picks up a smartphone or an iPad or tablet, you know, is using a Corning product, which is the Gorilla Glass, the flat screen, touch-sensitive glass. And so that's actually a huge part of their business now. So Corning is a great example, I think, of a company that never stood still, that was always looking for ways to stretch and expand the boundaries of the business model into new kinds of growth opportunities.
All right, we've got another question here from Christian Gattaz, which is, how do you transform this method, the four questions, or the four lenses rather, into a daily experience within a company?
Well, I think there are many ways that we can do that, and I was actually going to touch on that in this very last part. You know, we can...
Go for it.
Okay, well, let me just very quickly do that. There's the fourth part of the book, and I'll just, well, so basically those lenses allow us to see things in new ways, to really emulate the mind of the innovator. This fourth part of the book about how big ideas are built is really about, so how do we do it? And it goes back and looks at what is it that kind of creates these eureka moments. The myth is that innovation ideas hit us out of nowhere in a sudden flash of inspiration. Well, I want to know what that inspiration, that flash of inspiration is about. And I think, you know, what we now know about innovation is that our minds actually build ideas over time. It could be a few minutes, it could be many years, but they build ideas from a unique chain of associations and connections. And I want to just illustrate that with one case, which is Dyson. So how did James Dyson actually come up with the idea of a bagless vacuum cleaner? It didn't just hit him out of the blue. First of all, he's a designer, an engineer, an inventor anyway, so he's in that kind of space. And he's fascinated with reinventing product categories. So he came up with a challenge, which was that he was trying to refurbish a house that he bought, and he was finding that the Hoover vacuum cleaner was always filling up with dust, which meant that the vacuum bag, you know, was full and he was losing suction. So how do I reinvent, you know, a vacuum cleaner? He'd done a lot of research into possible solutions, but was coming up with nothing. And then one day he walked into a sawmill. And this was just a coincidence, but walked into a sawmill and he saw this huge industrial cyclone, which is like a industrial separator. That is this is the way you remove dust and dirt from those kind of industrial settings. And so the insight was, wow, that's a different way to collect dirt, right? So his idea, the eureka idea, based on the insight was, what if I scale down an industrial cyclone and install it on a vacuum cleaner? Well, that took him 5,000 prototypes and many years. But the point here is that, and this is a great example of leveraging resources, leveraging an existing idea in a new way. The point is that it didn't just come to him. It was based on an insight, and that insight then became the trigger for a completely new idea. And that's the essence of how big ideas are built. Insights are the stepping stones for creative thinking. You don't just jump to the other side of the river. You don't just get to the solution. You need these stepping stones, and the insights are the triggers, the stepping stones that lead us to these ideas. I have a chart in the book that kind of unpacks the flash of illumination into four parts, which really correspond to systems thinking: input, throughput, output, experience. The input is the insight. That's a new understanding. That insight creates a new leap of association in the mind, because the human mind works by association. So we start putting things together in our head differently. That results in a new idea. A new idea, by definition, is a new combination of thoughts. So the way we get to that is through the leap of association that's triggered by the insight. And the experience there is this eureka moment. I've found the answer. So the trigger is the front end. The trigger is the insight. And that's where we need the four lenses, because they are a tool for generating these insights that then go on to inspire big ideas. So what I do, as I said earlier, is I create these specific teams dedicated to the lenses. So we have orthodoxies teams, we have trends teams, resources teams, and we have teams looking at customer needs. They generate a lot of new insights using the lenses, and then they, as you said earlier, Julie, they crash them together in order to create new breakthrough innovations, because most of the really breakthrough stuff is not just one of the lenses, it's a combination of insights from those lenses put together. And then we can create events where this particular event, you see the 4 tents or tunnels, those are corresponding to the 4 lenses. Big events where we can, generate insights, crash them together, and put all of that online as well, create an online tool where we have a portfolio of insights around the lenses. We can also, to answer the question about how you embed it, we can also create a specific rooms in an innovation center dedicated to, the orthodoxies room, the trends room, the resources room, the needs room. And of course, we can train people right across the entire company to use those lenses every single day, to sort of come up with new ideas while they're working. That's the essence of the book.
Well, so we've got another question from Maureen, and this one is on reverse engineering. You mentioned that at the beginning of the hour. Do you have a story about that, or can you talk about how the 4 lenses have been applied to reverse engineering?
When I talk about reverse engineering, it's really saying reverse engineering the mind of the innovator. So in this case, what we're reverse engineering is the way innovators think. We're unpacking the mind, the thinking processes, the thinking patterns of great innovators, and saying, how do we then take those thinking processes and turn them into a system so that we can actually think the same way? That's what I'm referring to. I'm not talking about reverse engineering products or reverse engineering other services or other things, but it's really about reverse engineering the mind of the innovator so that we can turn that into a power tool.
Very cool. Well, we are getting close to the end here. We've got 4 minutes left, and so Rowan, I want to give you a chance to think about how you want to wrap this up, what call to action or invitation you want to make to people. And I want to say something important that I forgot at the beginning of the call, 2 things actually, which is anybody who wants to try, read the book and try using the 4 lenses, we'd love to get case studies or examples or stories for innovation excellence. So, we'd love to keep the dialogue going. I know you guys certainly would. And the second thing is I forgot to mention in my intro that you were just given a really beautiful award by the Israeli government, in particular the Israeli Tech Society, a global leader of innovation, along with Dean Kamen, the inventor of the Segway, and Ray Kurzweil. So that's rather beautiful to get that kind of acknowledgement, and I just wanted to celebrate that publicly for you and with you. And with that, I think we've had, what an amazing call, so many great questions. It's definitely been recorded. So I'm going to kind of hand it back to you to wrap up here, Rowan, and thank you so much. This has been really lovely.
Thanks so much, Julie. Big thank you to you for hosting and being a great anchor. Thanks to everyone for joining us. An hour goes by so incredibly quickly. Hope I could answer most of the questions that came up. If we weren't able to answer all the questions, please feel free to get in touch. I'll be delighted to answer any other questions through email or in some other way. And if you haven't bought the book already, please go out, buy the book, recommend it to your friends. Again, money back guarantee. I think you're going to be blown away by it. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. That's about all I have to say. You know me, I'm a speaker. I could go on for hours, days, weeks. So.
Well, and you're great at it. And I also want to say that if everyone on the line to stay in touch with us, follow us at IX Chat on Twitter. Sign up for the newsletter on Innovation Excellence. We keep everybody abreast of these kinds of events. We're hoping to do more with Rowan. If you're in New York City on April 23rd, Rowan is going to be doing a wonderful workshop on using the 4 lenses as a power tool on healthcare at the Anti-Summit. And you can find out about that at relevance.com, and that's RELEVENTS, and it happens this year only to be free, so it's really a good deal, and Rowan will be there along with Zulma. So Rowan and Zulma, I just want to say what a great hour, and I want to thank everybody who joined us. We really want to do a lot more of these kinds of free-flowing conversations with our community. So, watch for more invitations, including we'll do some more conversations with Rowan, because I sense there's a big appetite and we haven't completely filled it yet. So Rowan, congratulations on a great book. And anything else before we sign off?
No, again, if anybody wants to, to keep the conversation going or ask questions, my email is rg, so that's my initials, Rowan Gibson, rg at rowangibson.com. ROWANGIBSON.com. Easy. And otherwise, you can always find me at www.rowangibson.com.
Beautiful. Well, with that, have a great afternoon, everybody. And again, Rowan, thank you very much, and congratulations on a truly gorgeous book.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Okay. All right, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.